Katie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was liking the distinction between all of the three different categories of immigrants. I agree that that it does kind of people's reactions are different to whether they came legally or illegally. That's a tough issue. And some parts of the country are more affected than others. I haven't really prepared my thoughts ahead of time, but those are just my thoughts for now.
Katie, what country are you talking about?
The US.
Okay.
Yeah, we can keep the conversation broad, but most of my presentation is focused on US statistics because I had to pick a country to do analysis on. And so since the majority of people are from the US, then I chose that one. So, but, I think, it'll give a framework from which you can, look for statistics for any given country.
Hi, Garrett.
We actually had a white Australia policy here until I think like until the 1960s.
Wow.
They basically didn't want anyone non-white immigrating into Australia. It was a public policy until about 50
Hello,
years.
everyone.
Do you have a
Hi.
don't have to respond, but do you have a illegal immigration problem there? Like, because I think it would be hard to get to Australia.
Yeah, well, anybody who comes here by boat gets locked up in a detention centre on an island offshore, which is really inhumane and cruel. And they had about 2,000 people in there at one stage, but the worst of it was about 15 years ago. Now, I think there's hardly anyone there now. They've done a deal, but they still won't let them into Australia. They do deals with the states and other countries to transfer them out there, but they don't want to bring them here because they don't have immigration papers, so they just won't let them in if they don't have papers. And anyway, it's very complicated, long story. But we're a model of success for multiculturalism here. We're very multicultural now, but there is that sort of element of the White Australia policy lingers on to some degree. I think they let people in like with money, basically. They're very strict. Money and mainly qualifications or money, I think. I'm not sure. Definitely qualifications that they need. My ex-girlfriend was German and she was looking to immigrate here. And there was a list of jobs that they wanted in Australia, and one of them was hairdressers. So if you were a hairdresser, like on the weighting system, you got like 50 points for being a hairdresser, but if you're an engineer, you got 20 points because we've got enough engineers. I thought that was unusual. So they're just bringing people in, picking and choosing who they wanted to come in, which I thought was interesting.
Australia is doing much better than US. United States is a mess now. It's a mess. It's bad. Okay.
Well, we're an island, we're the largest island continent on Earth. So it's hard for people to physically get here.
We had more than 140 mass shooting this year already. In Tennessee, the representatives who protest get expelled from State House. It's unbelievable. It's just America has lost its mind. Okay, it's crazy.
Yeah.
The real problem in the United States is that Americans forget where they come from. They forget that they're the descendants of immigrants. So the debate in the United States about legal versus illegal immigrant tends to take the form of a straw man argument. Basically, the people that raise it aren't really that familiar with immigration law in the first place. If you come here and you present yourself at a gateway and request asylum, you're legal I think you're allowed to be in the United States until your case is adjudicated. But this point is frequently missed. You know, we in this country have 3 countries to the south of us that are failed states, basically, and people are bailing from them, like Honduras and Guatemala and Nicaragua. And they're literally trying to get away from violence. So it's like anything else. If you want compliance, it has to be straightforward, quick, fair, and you know, understandable. Any system, and our system of immigration isn't any of that. So that's the reason why it tends to get to be a mess. It's convoluted, takes a long time, and you know. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much for that. Nice to meet you. Is there anyone else that would like to jump in and introduce themselves? I see some names here I haven't seen before. Abe, Masood, or anyone would like to jump in?
I'll jump in.
Great.
So my name is Sahar. Nice to meet you guys. So this is my first time joining one of these meetings. Just as an introduction, I am an immigrant to the United States. I've been here since 1999. Still technically undocumented, although very close to getting my green card finally after a very long battle. So I saw this meeting. I wanted to join in just because I think I offer a very unique viewpoint on this topic, seeing as how I've, you know, basically lived it my entire life. So if anybody has any questions there, I'd be happy to jump in. And thank you to Jim for setting the record straight on some of the difficulties there with the system, because it is a very a convoluted system. Because I actually came here under a sponsorship from some relatives, and unfortunately, due to some family drama, they rescinded their sponsorship and left me and my whole family actually just kind of stuck in limbo here in the States, where we were told, you know, you're good people, you're not criminals, you can stay here, but at the same time, we can't do anything for you. We can't give you a green card. We can't give you work authorization. So just kind of living in this state of limbo here. But anyway, yeah, I'm happy to join you guys today, and I hope to add some things to the conversation.
That sounds great. Thank you for your input.
Hello, my name is Sean. I think American in many issues, we lost the common sense. The gentleman, what's your name? Sar? I don't know how to say it.
Sahar. No problem. I'm not too picky, so.
Yeah, it's okay. You talk about DACA, right? So children who come to the United States, brought in by their parents, they're kids, they don't understand anything. They grow up here from maybe elementary school, high school, and then maybe went to college. The whole life in the United States. If they are productive citizens, have a degree, or why not give them citizenship? It's just common sense. It's really stupid. It's just I'm politician, just not common sense, you know, make no sense. Okay, so it's not their fault. Their parents brought in there, right here, right? Their children. Why it makes their life so miserable? They worry about it, which they don't have a work permit, they cannot work, and they don't know when they're going to be deported. You know, they live in constant fear. Okay, it makes absolute no sense. All right, happy that.
Unfortunately, DACA didn't take off as much as we hoped it would, because I actually I had the opportunity to maybe sign up for DACA, but it was just when Trump was about to get elected, and my brothers and I decided not to sign up because it seemed like they were going to take it away, which they basically have been. They don't let any new people sign up for DACA anymore, not since Trump was in office, and it also looks like the program is going to end soon. And it also was never a pathway to citizenship, which was a big problem for a lot of us. It basically just gave us the ability to work. And there.
Where did you go?
But yeah, so unfortunately, DACA seems to have kind of died there. The Democrats had the opportunity to maybe make some movement forward on that, but they for some reason just kind of been sitting on their hands and refused to do anything about it. So so unfortunately, it looks like it's on its way out at the moment.
Would anyone else like to go ahead and introduce yourself and state what interests you about tonight? We've got 5 more minutes.
Well, I mean, if there's nobody's got anything to say, I can just give an account of what happened in England, like in the 80s, very quickly, just as an example of another country.
Of course.
So when I was 13 years old, my parents took me to London, where my father was born, and we went to the family home in London. And I remember going to the shops with one of my uncles, and there was some, and I don't mean to offend anyone here, but I'm just being honest, some Pakistani people crossing the road. And my uncle said, if you run them over, you get 5 points. And he was joking. He did have a good sense of humor and he wouldn't hurt anyone. He wasn't a violent guy, but he made that joke. And then we stayed in London for 6 months, and my grandfather was, I don't know if anybody's heard of the English television character Alf Garrett, who's a very racist, bigoted, conservative Englishman. And there was a TV series about Alf Garrett. And my grandfather was quite similar to him, and very funny too. He wouldn't hurt anyone, but he had a bit of an acerbic wit, acerbic humor. And he would make these sort of racist jokes. And I remember when I was 13 years old, I remember thinking, oh, this is what racism is. Wow, this is racism. And I mean, they didn't really mean it. They wouldn't hurt anyone. I want to emphasize that. But they would make these sort of derogatory jokes about Pakistani people. And then, so I went back to London in about 2005 and went back to the family home. And that area was completely, utterly, everyone's Pakistan. There's hardly anyone non-Pakistani in the whole area. So like, and then you realize that in England, I think 60% of people in England now are actually Anglo-Saxon and 40% are Asian and Eastern European. And so it dawned on me, it occurred to me, that's why my grandfather and my uncles were getting upset, because they could see what was going to happen and their culture. So the England that existed then is no longer there. And I could understand that. I find that very interesting, that this is how racism does happen. And if you are overtaken by another race, I think it's natural that people get upset, and it's extremely politically correct to say, oh, no, you can't criticize anyone. But it's just human nature, I think, that to some degree, if you are completely taken over by another race, you do tend to become a little bit racist. And I think that's just human nature. So I thought that was interesting. Anyway, that's the story of what happened in England. And that's why Brexit occurred. Because people said, no, we don't want anyone else coming here. We want our culture to remain.
Yeah,
And,
that's, I talked to
yeah.
somebody, when Brexit was happening, I talked to somebody who was British. My background is British as well. And his opinion was, we have to do Brexit because I don't even recognize the country anymore, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, they very strongly, well, those who voted for Brexit were, a lot of it was motivated by the thought that they didn't have control over their own immigration and that it had been too much too fast.
And you can't blame those, like, you cannot blame those people for wanting to come to another country and wanting to immigrate and get a better life. You can't blame them. It's just the government they wanted to increase the population.
Yeah, the the other aspect of it is it doesn't even need to be racism, but more a fear of cultural, a loss of cultural components. So for instance, where I am in Canada, we're a fairly liberal democracy relative to a lot of other countries. And a lot of immigrants are coming from very conservative cultures. So their attitudes about sex or religion or something like that can sometimes, you know, bring pressure on, you know, what has been a fairly open and liberal democracy, because when they vote, and I'm not trying to create a you know a blanket statement here, but I'm saying often when people vote, they vote based on whatever their cultural background was, and when you have a significant amount of immigration, that starts to move the needle of the, you know, the cultural average, let's say, to a place where you know, may or may not be better, because you know, influence can be both positive and negative. We've had specifically on the topic of sex education, you know, a fairly liberal country like a lot of the Northern European ones, or Canada, you know, tends to be in favor of sex education, where conservatives coming in from more religious-based countries will often vote in a manner that says, no, we don't want sex education, you know, taught in our schools and things like that. That's up to the parents to teach their children and things like that. So it can definitely change the dynamics of the local culture.
I see Abe's hands up. Would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, I'm Abe, and I'm from New Jersey. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one thing about all these things is just a fear of immigrants. I mean, it's immigrants bring jobs, they improve the economy. And over years, you find that these people are the ones slowly coming up, and and you have to accept them. I mean, it's and that's what's great about America. We accept everybody of all ethnicities, and they learn from their experiences, and that's what happens. And now it has come to a certain stage in which it's the common man doesn't. I mean, most people don't accept this racism. I mean, you go to a place, and if somebody tells you about this ethnicity and that ethnicity, most people don't. I mean, they are educated and intelligent enough not to accept it.
Thank you so much. Garrett, did you want to get started soon?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So let me start off with a quick intro. So just to introduce myself, my name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor in the Fortune 500 and startups alike. And now I'm an entrepreneur whose hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy. I'm also the executive director of the Freethinker Institute. The Freethinker Institute is the organization that brings to you tonight's event. And we're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members to be the best version of themselves, seek truth, and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday evening, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry, in the spirit of lifelong learning. And we also have weekly members-only events to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives and create a close-knit community of friends. So Ellis will post more information about the organization and membership for anyone interested. We have only one rule in the FTI, which I'd ask everyone to honor, which is to be polite. We talk about a lot of very controversial subjects, immigration being one of them. And so we can have the best conversation if everyone remains polite, and everyone can share any opinion they want, anything from extreme xenophobia to, extreme acceptance of all cultures. What matters is that we convey our opinions politely. That kind of helps everyone stay rational about the way that we have the conversation and use logical arguments to defend ourselves and our perspective. Although I would argue that rather than defending ourselves and our perspectives, I would encourage everyone to listen, do what we call listening to understand in the Freethinker Institute, which is really trying to empathize with other people and try to dig in deep into why other people think what they think, especially if they have radically different beliefs than us. And so hopefully we can do some of that in the discussion portion of the evening. So that said, tonight is about whether or not immigration is a good thing or a bad thing. And that's kind of a loaded question. It's not necessarily objectively a good thing or a bad thing. It's all contextual. But I would argue that I'm going to mostly focus on statistics relating to the US today. But you can look at similar metrics for other countries and arguments for and against immigration compared to other countries. There are also a few statements made in the social portion of the evening that I'll try to address after the presentation portion of the evening, and then we'll get into conversation. We will also try to dispel some common myths about immigration tonight, because I think there are a lot of myths, as was alluded to in the social portion of the evening. And so we'll try to dispel a few of those myths, and then we do have a large group, so I just want to ask everyone to, when you do raise your hand, we'll hold questions until after the presentation, and then when we do have questions, to limit questions and comments to one question or one comment per time that you raise your hand. You're welcome to raise your hand as many times as you want, but that just gives everyone a chance to cycle through. And it also allows me to sort of respond to the thing that's mentioned without taking a really long period of time for each time someone raises their hand. So that said, there will be links also to our Discord community, which I'll try to remember to do a demo of at the end of the evening, so that people can get a brief idea of how easy it is to use Discord if you get an intro. It can be a little difficult to use if you haven't gotten an intro. So I do like to give people an intro because it's helpful to be acquainted with it, by someone who's used it before and can teach you how it works. So that said, let me share my screen. And I have 3 monitors, so I'll be staring off into a corner most of the evening because my notes will be on one monitor and my presentation is on another monitor. So that said, let's just jump into it. Sorry, I have an old agenda there. I forgot to update the agenda. So first, the US population, a couple of background statistics. Without immigration, the US population is actually declining. If there were no immigration, you can see this gray bar is in 2017, 18, and 19. If there were no immigration, this is how much the US population would have declined in absolute numbers. And so that's a sort of background fact that lays the groundwork for some of the other conversation points as we move throughout the evening. Just a statistic and fact to present. One of the problems, or a couple of the problems with the declining population, is that as the population tends to age, you end up with a higher the average age of the population gets higher, and so you have more older people who are not necessarily contributing as much tax revenue because they're retired, and they have higher healthcare expenses, which when you come to Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, people are pulling out of all of those programs in their elder years, and there are less people contributing to them. And unfortunately, the way that those programs have all been structured in the US, they are not programs that take the money that you invest in them and invest that money during your lifetime so that it will have appreciated throughout your lifetime to be enough money to pay out. It's basically what's called a Ponzi scheme, which means that the people that are paying in today, we're paying out immediately, and the government doesn't save and invest any of that that money from those programs as income. And so historically, that means that it's not very sustainable when you have a large aging population, which is a flaw in and of those programs themselves, and also a flaw in the fact that we don't hold our government responsible for the way that they handle government funds. They often, just want to take all the money they can now to get themselves reelected, and not think about long-term financial security of programs that are important to a lot of average Americans. So unfortunately, that is the reality that we're living in today. Hopefully that reality will change someday if we can get a more educated population, and holding government politicians accountable to making more long-term decisions rather than short-term decisions. But for now, what ends up happening is, with the declining population, you have more money going out than coming in, and these programs are scheduled to go bankrupt over time because of that, even with the immigration that we see and the increased tax revenue from immigrants. And if we didn't have immigrants, that would happen much faster, because those programs would have less money coming into them, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on. So the other thing is, if you have a larger aging population, you end up with, if you are going to maintain some of those programs for as long as you can, you end up creating a bigger debt per capita to pay off for those of us that remain as part of the working force, and for our children and our grandchildren to pay off if we keep those programs sustained throughout our retirement. So reason number one to be concerned about immigration, these are reasons that I've heard people say, is that immigrants are taking US citizens' jobs. So that's a pretty common thing that I've heard anti-immigrant folks say. And so I want to evaluate that and do our own little, fact check against this. And so it turns out that there are actually 9.8 million open jobs as of February of 2023. At the same time, there are only 5.8 million unemployed people, which means even if every current immigrant took a job and every unemployed person took a job, there would be 4 million, a job that is currently open, there would be 4 million open jobs, still remaining that there simply aren't enough people to fill in the US because there aren't people with that skill set. Now, note, it is worth noting that sometimes it is true that an immigrant takes a job that a US citizen would have taken, and that's because they both have the same skill set, and potentially the immigrant either was more qualified or was willing to work for less. And so it's not to discount the idea that immigrants, to claim that immigrants never take US citizens' jobs. But what is, I think, a fair assertion is that there are plenty of jobs for people who get themselves a valuable skill set and educate themselves in how to have a valuable skill set in a high-paying job, which is very, desired by employers. And so there are actually more than enough jobs for everybody, US citizens, immigrants, legal and illegal, if we consider that people can actually educate themselves in how to get one of these open jobs that employers are really wanting to fill and just can't find enough people that are qualified to fill them. So one of the things that I'll mention about the FTI is that I teach a product management boot camp, which is what I've done most of my career. It's software, inventing software. It's called product management in the field. And there's very low upfront cost, and basically graduates earn six figures doing product management. And I'd like to see more programs like that around the country, teaching people the skill set that they need to get a high-paying job. And that's one of the goals of the FTI, is to have everybody in the world someday, we're hoping to become a big and influential organization someday. We want to help ensure that everybody in the world makes enough money that more money doesn't buy happiness, which, six figures is just above the level at which more money theoretically doesn't buy more happiness. So that's a little bit of information. I would also say that, you know, when you talk about like, how does one get that skill set? Well, there's so much information on the internet about every job under the sun, and a little bit of research from a person who has a mind to make more money and get a valuable skill set, especially if they're out of work right now, and on unemployment, for example. You can teach yourself a job, and now with ChatGPT, it's actually even easier to teach yourself a new job. You can actually have ChatGPT do half the work for you in just about any job, and you really only have to learn, you know, a small fraction of what you used to need to learn, because ChatGPT knows so much about almost all of the jobs that are, you know, in demand by employers, and it'll tell you all the answers for free. So and then another thing that I often hear is that that Democrats want open borders or have open borders. I usually ask people when they say this, can you show me the website of a politician calling for open borders? And so far, no one's been able to do that. I encourage anyone who thinks that Democrats are trying to create open borders, and meaning no immigration limits, to try to find an example of a website like a website of a politician in the US that is advocating for open borders, or you know, lack of any immigration quotas or limits. Snopes actually does a good job dispelling that myth. The link is here, and I'll post the link to this presentation in the online community after the presentation is over. And so if anyone wants to read the Snopes, it's actually a very good in-depth article about all of the different people and their, you know, a wide variety of opinions on immigration from both Democrats and Republicans. And I think it's worth a read for anyone that wants to get more knowledgeable on the subject. So how many immigrants are arriving? So it looks like, you know, considering we just talked about how there's a job shortage of 4 million people, if we look at how many immigrants are coming each year, theoretically, you know, if we were bringing in 4 to 6 million new immigrants a year, well, that number of open jobs would be gone right away. But actually, we're only bringing in roughly 600,000. And this isn't bringing in to the US, by the way. When I say 600, almost 600,000 people, this includes people who are already in the US, but just get permanent permission to live here. I think Sahar was saying, like, he's just now getting, like, you know, permanent position, you know, he's kind of had the A-OK for you to be here, buddy, but like not an official, yes, you're allowed to be here. So he would count in this number about becoming officially allowed to be here. And so this doesn't mean 600,000 new people coming into the country. It means 600,000 people allowed to stay in the US indefinitely per year, which is the only thing I was able to find easy statistics on when I researched it. So this was the closest I could do. All the sources for the data in the presentation are in the notes of the slides, by the way. So if anyone is interested in those, you can look at the link in the Discord community afterward, and you can look those up. So that was from, I think, the U.S. Department of Immigration, those statistics. So some people are concerned that immigrants are going to cause crime or terrorism. And so I thought it would be interesting to look at that from an objective perspective, as I've been trying to do so far, at a lot of the reasons that people have against, the reasons people use to be against immigration. And so it turns out that illegal immigrants, if you look at native-born Americans versus immigrants in terms of incarceration, which is a rough proxy for how much crime is caused, and then it actually turns out that native-born Americans are drastically more likely to commit crimes than immigrants. 380 incarcerations per 100,000 people for immigrants, and almost 1,500 per 100,000 people for native-born Americans. So they're actually illegal immigrants are 41% less likely to be incarcerated than native-born Americans, and legal immigrants are 74% less likely to be incarcerated than natives. So when people say get rid of all the immigrants in order to reduce the crime, actually we'd have to get rid of all the US citizens to reduce the crime, which I guess we could leave the Native Americans, but that doesn't leave very many Americans to fill the jobs that we are having trouble filling already. So, but I found that to be pretty eye-opening statistics where like I didn't expect it to be that drastic of a difference, quite frankly. And then I looked at terrorism, and it turns out that because theoretically you would think that that terrorism, like would be a hotbed of problems for immigrants, but actually, other than 9/11, it's actually more likely that domestic people would be terrorists, and they've caused more damage. There were 54 foreign terrorists from 1975 to 2017. There are 139 domestic terrorists. And then other than the 2,979 people that died from 9/11, which is, very relevant, but I think we would need to also understand why 9/11 happened. And it's not just, a bunch of terrorists decide to come to America because they hate America for no good reason. The terrorists that committed 9/11, if you've never watched Charlie Wilson's War, I highly recommend that, because it gives all the long history behind what motivated the terrorists in 9/11 to do what they did. And they were obviously not justified, but to say that the US didn't make foreign policy mistakes that resulted in 9/11 would be, completely surprising for someone to make that claim to me after watching Charlie Wilson's War. So if anyone wants to watch it and then have that debate in the online community, I would love to. We should probably have another, event about 9/11, although it was so long ago. I feel like a lot of people are forgetting it, but I certainly remember that day vividly. The truth is, though, even when you consider 9/11, the number of deaths from terrorism is still exceedingly low compared to the drastically higher number of deaths from criminal behavior of native-born Americans versus immigrants. If you take terrorism and crime together, the immigrants are actually the much safer bet between when you combine terrorism and crime as risk areas. The natives are the much more risky group. So I'm a US citizen born in the US, by the way. So I'm one of those natives that I'm putting into that high risk group. So not that that matters or should matter, but I'm just putting it out there. So some people say that immigrants cost the federal government more money while not contributing to taxes. Well, immigrants actually contributed $492 billion in taxes in 2019. Total tax revenues were $1.6 trillion. Immigrants make up 13.5% of the population. I tried to make the math easy for you, and it turns out that immigrants pay roughly a little over $11,000 in tax per person, whereas native-born US citizens pay a little under $4,000 in tax. So actually, and by the way, it turns out, you might say, well, immigrants cost so much more in taxes. Well, it turns out that's not true. Immigrants versus US citizens, for roughly the same demographics and number of kids per household, they have very similar cost structures between the two of them. So there's really no difference, and I have a source for that here as well. So actually, again, if you want to throw out the people that aren't paying their fair share of taxes, we've got to throw out all of us native-born US citizens. So don't think that's a good option. Again, I'm joking. But I have to say this was another one that shocked me. Until I put this presentation together, I had no idea immigrants paid so much more in taxes than native-born citizens. And actually, I thought it would be the other way around. I thought that immigrants would pay less taxes, but that's why it's important to challenge our confirmation bias and look at the data and look at the statistics, because you can be surprised. And so, yeah, and that's part of what tonight is about, is hopefully enlightening people as to, facts and data that we may not have otherwise been aware of. I certainly wasn't aware of them until I prepared for this presentation this weekend. And hopefully some of this is news to some of you as well. And I would welcome feedback to whether or not that's true after the presentation is over, whether you learned anything new tonight. So benefits of immigration. So I happen to be in the food tech industry, so I'm going to say tasty international restaurants. Let's face it, like international restaurants have some really good food. Love a Laotian wine bar and a Sri Lankan restaurant in New York City. They're some of my favorite restaurants. I went to a Georgian restaurant in Brooklyn that was delicious, right? And getting people from all over the world. I mean, New York is, the diversest city in the world, I think. And having all of those diverse populations in one place creates a lot of a big cultural mix. And that big cultural mix has another benefit, which is innovation. There's, a good reason that America is, the hotbed of innovation that it is. If you look at most of the most innovative country, and I didn't do this analysis, now I'm realizing I should have, is looking at which countries have the most, patents and innovative companies, et cetera, et cetera. But, the US is pretty often, informally credited with that. And I think if we did some digging and data, we would find that the US is a highly innovative country. And it's also a huge melting pot of cultures. And I would argue that those are not just correlation, they're causation, because by getting these different cultures all in one place, we sort of challenge each other's norms in a way that gets people thinking outside the box. It creates more diverse teams, which are more well-balanced and can think about problems from a wide variety of perspectives. I remember the year that I lived in Spain and just having a lot of my assumptions as an American completely challenged, where in Spain, they just took for granted as true and normal something that I thought was the craziest thing, like in Spain, when you greet someone, you kiss on the cheek, right? You kiss like everybody you meet on the cheek in Spain, a kiss on each cheek. If you really like the person, it's 3 kisses. And that just like was very different than the way that I grew up on the East Coast in America. So that's just one of many different cultural differences. But, that's where I would say the cultural diversity brings a lot of innovation with it. The other thing was mentioned in the social is giving human beings the chance to live a more prosperous life, which is part of the American dream. To give the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the reason we take so many refugees is that there are lots of places where, just for being yourself in a country, your life could be threatened. And just for being who you were born as and being your authentic self, your life could be threatened. And America is a place that says, your life shouldn't be threatened for being yourself, right? You should be able to be your authentic self. And as long as you're not causing harm to anyone else, you should be able to live your life authentically. And, to me, that's a great thing. It's something that I've always liked about America. And I hope we continue to create that kind of opportunity for people that are running away from countries that have authoritarian regimes or, a lot of persecution of, various, there are so many different reasons that people persecute, whether it's, all the isms and the phobias, and also political reasons, right? And North Korea, if you say something bad about the supreme leader, you'll be sentenced to life in prison if not executed. So there are all sorts of reasons, and so most U.S. citizens, by the way, are descended from immigrants, which was also mentioned in the social. So we really have a time-honored tradition of accepting immigrants, and not only accepting immigrants, but we're now the high 90% minimum of the country are descended from immigrants, probably like high 90%. And so either are immigrants or are descended from immigrants. it's a small percentage of the population that's really native born. So in summary, I like to do summary slides. I don't always get the chance to do them, but you know, native born people pay $3,900 in taxes, immigrants pay $11,000 in taxes. 54 terrorists killed 58 people that were immigrants other than 9/11, and 139 terrorists killed 413 people for native born terrorists. For crimes, almost 1,500 people and 100,000 are in jail for crimes from native born Americans, which is 3.8 times more likely to be jailed than immigrants. And for jobs, we have 4 million unfilled jobs, and we only let 0.6 people become entitled to live here each year. And you know, I didn't do the time analysis of that gap, but my guess is that the number of open jobs is not getting filled up or even trending to go away. I think there are probably only going to be more, you know, unfilled jobs with time. So that said, that's the end of the presentation. I would love to hear whether or not, you know, maybe with a raise of hands. How about a raise of hands for everybody that, or maybe like we could do like a, what's it called? Maybe just write in the chat, say, you know, I learned something or I didn't learn anything. You know, for whether or not you learned something or you didn't learn anything. If people are willing to write. There's one I did. Anyone else willing to share? Great. Good, then my effort was worth it. So I spent like 5 hours preparing for this and another presentation this weekend. So I'm really glad to hear that people learn things from it. My favorite things to do are to learn and to teach, and I've been lucky enough to be able to do both of those in my career and get paid for doing it. This I do for free, but career-wise, I get paid for doing it. So that said, Darlene has her hand up. Yeah, Dominic, I could have had ChatGPT make the presentation, right? Unfortunately, ChatGPT is not quite that advanced yet, and I hope it doesn't get quite that advanced. I'm very against pseudosentient AI, but it's getting there. It's advancing fast. So Darlene, go ahead and ask your question. Oh, by the way, I forgot to address two things mentioned in the social while Darlene is going off of mute. One was there was a statement that you can't blame someone whose culture was taken over by another culture for being racist. I'd argue that I actually can. Like I guess like I don't think that having your culture taking over is a good reason to be racist. I actually don't think there are good reasons to be racist, even if people of a certain race are always mean to you. You know, in your experience, if some of them are not mean to you, you still have to judge each individual as an individual, because, you know, it might just be correlation that those people are being mean to you, or it could be that you were mean to them first because of their race. And so I would argue that that's, you know, there's not a good reason for being racist. And sorry, Will, if you wanted to respond to that, because I think you made the comment.
Yeah, do you mind if I just quickly reply, Garrett? Because I was the one who said it.
Yeah, you did. Go ahead.
I think I worded it badly. I didn't mean they will be racist. You can't blame them for being racist. What I meant was you can't blame them for getting a little bit upset. Like, I just think if we're really honest about human nature, if you just take the situation, say, with my grandfather's house in Greenwood, London, and when I went back there like 30 years later, everyone in that street was Pakistani. Everyone in the entire city was Pakistani, pretty much. And if you don't find that annoying or a little bit irksome, and all the street signs are in Pakistani, I think it's just human nature, and we have to be honest about it. I'm not saying it's okay to be racist. I'm certainly not racist. I'm certainly not. But just to understand that, and we can help, that can help solve the problems if we just shine a light on this honesty, that it does become annoying. and upsetting to people, but it doesn't mean you're racist.
I think it's well noted that people do get upset by it. People do get annoyed by it. I think that a separate question is whether or not it's justifiable. Because personally, you know, like I moved into a very Jewish neighborhood in the Lower East Side, and all my neighbors were kosher. And they said, I can't drink wine with you unless it's Mavushal wine. Well, what did I do? I went out and I bought Mavushal wine so I could have them over for wine. Or I bought kosher wine and I just let them pour it because they're allowed to pour kosher wine, but I'm not allowed to pour the kosher wine. And I don't care if my guests pour the wine, that's fine with me. The kosher wine is usually a little better quality than Mavushal. And I learned a couple of words of Hebrew, right? And, you know, because to me, like, celebrating diversity is a good thing. And being in a neighborhood that you're a minority is a lot of fun if you look at it as a lot of fun instead of looking at it as a threat to humanity. And I think the problem lies not in the people like who are coming into a place that is now their community because there are enough people there that there's a critical mass that they feel at home. The problem is in not accepting diversity and not, you know, trying to find a way to make the best of it or choosing to move out, right? You can always say, well, this neighborhood's Pakistani, I don't want to be here anymore, move somewhere else, right? And you can choose to do that, just like the Pakistanis chose to move to that neighborhood in the first place. And so all I would say is that I would encourage the Pakistanis not to all move to the same neighborhood where they don't need to learn English. You know, I think they would benefit from learning from the culture of the country that they live in too. And so I'm not making this one-sided. I think that both sides should be trying to compromise and that we all learn more from learning from each other and, you know, learning from other cultures. Does that make sense, Will?
Oh, it certainly does, Garrett, but I fully understand what you mean, but I think if we're honest about human nature, when you see that, say, the whole of Greater London now is pretty well Pakistani and Eastern European people, the natural reflex in human nature, because human nature is not always ideal. You're an exception. You're particularly benevolent and kind and well educated, but most people in that situation where their entire, I'm talking like hundreds of thousands of people in each area have now been more or less displaced by another race. It's just natural to feel a little bit of animosity towards them. And I'm not saying it's a good thing. I just think we need to shine a light on that dark side of human nature. That's all.
Yeah,
Garrett, may I kind of respond to what's just being discussed here?
yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Okay, I'm also in line, by the way. I sort of see that as a microcosmic example, but when you think of a macrocosmic example, the way I see it, when you think of how many countries that England has colonized, you know, over the years, you know, whether it be India, whether it be many countries, and they just go in and decide to colonize this country.
Jenny, I think I know where you're going.
Yeah, so you know, it's almost like in payback, you know, payback time to a certain degree.
Karma's a bitch.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of see it. Yeah, but I also wanted to make a comment that, Garrett, I certainly did learn from your lecture. I mean, I had no idea that immigrants paid more tax than native born. Yeah, that was very interesting.
I would have bet money that they didn't, and I'm so glad I didn't. I haven't lost a bet in 20 years. I would have lost that bet if someone had bet. So luckily I did the research before I bet. So, but I would have.
Yeah, that was very interesting, and some other information that you gave us. So thank you very much for that lecture.
You're welcome. Just so you know, I fact checked you about the percentage of London that's Arab born, and the closest categorization that the UK census has is white other, and only around 20% of London's population is white other. So it's still a small minority, you know, a significant minority, but relatively small. And that said,
well, I'll check that out because you know, it depends what you mean by white other and whether
Yeah, I
they're
mean that
first generation.
overemphasizes, right? Because that includes like white other could include Portuguese and Spanish and all kinds of other things. So you can look up whether or not there's a better definition, but that was a ChatGPT fact check. And then the other thing you were mentioning racism. I think tonight's conversation, we did another one on racism. Tonight's conversation is more about xenophobia, which is like a phobia of people from other countries or cultures. And so I think it's more about xenophobia rather than racism because, for tonight's conversation. That said, that's just kind of a nit to pick. That said, I want to let Sahar go. Really cool to hear your Palestinian.
It's Ellis. I forgot to
Yeah.
mention everyone has about 3.5 minutes, or wrapping up by 4. Thanks.
Yep. Dominic, if you have any good examples of ChatGPT like failing fact checks more often than the average human being, I would love to hear a study on that. Although ChatGPT is pretty new, there may not be studies, but it's been pretty consistent at the answers that I've gotten when I fact check ChatGPT. It's become a waste of my time to fact check ChatGPT because it's pretty good. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's more perfect than most human beings, in my opinion. That said, I want to let Sahar go.
So I have a lot of things actually I'd like to say, but I will start with one just to be respectful. I'll probably raise my hand a few times here.
Thank you. Please do.
But the importance of language is the first thing I want to talk about, especially when it comes to the immigration debate. And this is something that I actually had to learn myself, just growing up as an immigrant and changing the language around it. And it mainly centers around the fact that freedom of movement is a human right, and it's human nature, and it's always been something that people do. And it's kind of been this weird thing, especially in conservative circles, to refer to immigration or immigrants in particular as illegal versus legal. And I think, and it's one of those things that kind of debases the argument before it starts, because really the only difference in immigrants is some are documented and some are undocumented, and it's just a much more fair way of I guess of putting it out there without having an unconscious bias from the very beginning, because immigration is not a criminal issue, it's a civil issue. So it's important to make that clear, that there's really no such thing as illegal people or illegal immigrants, but there are some that are undocumented and maybe didn't go through the fully correct process, but that doesn't make them illegal in any way.
So I'm gonna I like you, Sahar. So but I will say I do think that technically there are immigration laws, and if you don't go through the formal process, it is technically against the law. But some people can be totally undocumented when they arrive in the US, as was mentioned, including like it was mentioned about people seeking asylum. If you're seeking asylum and you come to the US to a port of entry, you don't need to have any documentation. You don't need to have any permission. All you need to do is say, I'm, under threat of, harm in my home country. I'm here at a port of entry. I need a safe place, and I am trying to become a refuge. I'm trying to become I'm seeking asylum. And so you don't need any documentation to be following the legal process if you're seeking asylum. I don't know about the other types of immigration, but I would say that I would highly encourage people to follow the legal process. And I think that it's important to have a legal process that sets some level of quota right now in the world that we live in. And I think there's value in that. I guess, the alternative would be totally open borders and let as many people come to the US as they want. And, I don't think that makes sense either. I think that our quotas are too low right now, and that's another story for debate. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty detail of how many immigrants should we be letting in, but I did want to make the distinction of that there is a legal process for immigration, and theoretically, if you don't follow that, that's technically what people mean by illegal immigration. Does that make sense? They're not illegal people, they're just breaking a law of the US by coming here without following the process.
Yeah, and I actually completely agree with you there. I don't disagree with anything. The main issue that pertains to me is that until very recently in America, immigration was a civil issue. So even as opposed to a criminal issue. So even if you did come in and break some of the certain laws that were involved in coming in, it was a civil matter, not a criminal matter, and that's the main distinction. Because I don't disagree with the things you're saying on a principles
Thanks.
level.
I appreciate your making that point because that's something I didn't know. And I will, on that point, make a mention of under the Trump administration, even people who were legal immigrants that were seeking asylum at a port of entry were separated from their children, sometimes for years. 4-year-old and 5-year-old children separated from their children for years. Some of the parents committed suicide because they were so depressed from being separated from their young children. And to me, that is very unethical. And, you know, people should be held account from a criminal perspective about causing that kind of harm for people who were perfectly law-abiding, you know, immigrants. And they did everything right. They did it by the book, and they still got punished, you know, with this horrendous, you know, essentially torture, being separated. Like, my kids are 6. I can't imagine if someone separated me from them for a week, let alone for years. I would be ready to like kill someone. So, you know, it's, you know, unconscionable, the types of things that were done in the name of trying to prevent immigrants from coming, you know, through coercion. And those are the types of things that, you know, torture is used to try to, you know, as a preventative measure to stop people from causing crime. And, you know, to me, that is a form of torture. That said, I want to let Bill go.
Thanks. First, I'll lower my hand. Wonderful statistics. As everybody else has said, some real shockers in there. I too would have thought immigrants have take the shitty jobs, so they must be paying, you know, must be earning less money and paying less taxes.
I got to get a
Phenomenal.
shittier job. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, you know, you know, the statistics of crime. Actually, I already knew that one from other conversations I've had, but yeah, good to see it validated. And it makes sense. Like, I think people conflate the concept of illegal immigrants with therefore every immigrant must be illegal or something, or not behaving legally and things like that. I mean, it's just rampant prejudice, but I mean, who knows? Or they just assume anybody who's, you know, taking these jobs is going to be a sideline criminal or something like that. Who knows? I mean, that, you know, the concept of rapists and murderers, the fact that the president can say that is just insane.
Just to be fair, it is possible that Trump's friends who are Mexican are rapists and murderers. My friends that are Mexican are the nicest people you've ever met, but I don't know Trump's friends that are Mexican, so I can't actually opine on that. So he might just be speaking from personal experience.
Yeah. You know, criminal minds could, you know, work with other criminals.
Look, I don't want to judge, like, it's possible. So, but I do hear what you're saying. Like, it was an inappropriate thing to say, and just like Hillary saying deplorables was an inappropriate thing to say, you know, Trump has a lot more of those inappropriate things to say than most politicians, though.
And the on the concept of stealing jobs, I have always thought that's just an absolutely ludicrous concept, because as if any particular country has a set number of jobs that are either that have to be taken by somebody and everybody else goes hungry. Another way to look at it is just look at the growth of the population in the US, and, you know, going from whatever million to whatever million to whatever million, you know, at the same time, the unemployment level stays roughly the same. So, you know, 300 million people, 400 million people, 200 million people, 100 million people, originally way back when it was only 10 million people, you know, the employment rate is roughly the same. Unemployment rate, sorry. So yeah, I mean, if immigrants were coming in and actually stealing jobs that couldn't be replaced, we would have topped out at 10 million, you know, when the population was 10 million or something, not 400 million. So I've always thought that's just a ludicrous concept to even contemplate. I mean, clearly, immigrants add to the general pool. Yes, some of those immigrants are going to take nice union jobs at General Motors that an otherwise, local person would claim, but they also, by contributing taxes, by contributing to the economy, they also end up creating a whole bunch of opportunities for native people to, not native, sorry, American-born people to work out too. So I think, it's proven over and over again that it's a wash. Immigration is a wash in terms of jobs because the employment rate stays constant throughout. So.
Thank you for that comment, Bill. And you just gave me a great idea, which is if I can make enough money with my for-profit, I want to create a program in the Free Thinker Institute for immigrants to teach American-born people how to do high-wage work. Then we would get away from this idea that immigrants are taking all the low-wage, because immigrants are clearly in the high-wage work if they're paying higher taxes. So let's have them teach, people who are born in the US how to do those high-wage jobs. And that would, I think, help combat a lot of the stigma, if one of these people that is very anti-immigration got taught how to get a high-wage job from an immigrant. Like, wouldn't that be cool?
Is your, by the way, is your statistic for that 11,000 versus 3,000, is that an average, a mean or a median?
I think it's an average.
So it's like a mean average.
Yeah.
So that also includes people who are multimillionaires, billionaires who are paying,
Yes.
hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah,
in
but it
taxes.
does on both sides. So yeah, but yeah.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting that like, I mean, it'd be interesting to see, like, do some immigrants become really wealthy and they skew it, or or vice versa or whatever. It'd be interesting to carve it up into quartiles or
well,
deciles or something.
Yeah, I didn't do that. So, but yeah. That said, thanks, Bill, for your comments. Abe, you want to go next?
Yeah. I mean, being an immigrant myself, there are some of these things which I find little surprising. The American government doesn't invest in education, doesn't have a proper apprentice program, and they have these jobs which the local people are not qualified, that they have to import immigrants and the skill set. And these countries, I mean, as an immigrant from a professional, being in a professional course, my country subsidized my education. I came here without a loan. I didn't have anything. And all I had was, a high wage at the start, while my contemporaries were paying off their loans. And that's something which is intriguing, which I just can't figure out. And we have a head start compared to a local American for the same job.
Where are you from, Abe?
I'm from India.
Okay.
Ellis, do you
Thanks,
mind?
Abe, for saying that. I've been seeing here around
Ellis-
that a lot.
Ellis, do you mind moderating for a couple of minutes? I need to handle a family issue.
Okay, no problem.
I'll be back.
Oh, anyway, sorry to jump in. I was just saying, Abe, thank you for saying that, because I'm seeing that in my workplace. I work with a lot of people from India in the banking. And they're definitely arriving with wonderful educations and skills and abilities. And they move up very quickly. Anyhow, Abe, did you want to say anything else regarding this?
Yes, I mean, taking an medical education. I mean, if you want to become a medical doctor here, I mean, you have to take a huge loan, and it's not every common man who can afford those loans unless you come from a rich family. And while the Indian government, which I came from, and they subsidized all my education, I came here without a loan. And while everybody else was paying off their loan, I didn't have to pay off a loan. I bought a house. So, I mean, there is a lot of disparity, and it's unfortunate. nobody talks about that, about investing in education and investing in apprenticeship to upgrade skills of the local citizens. That's it.
Thank you so much, Abe. Richard, you'd like to go next?
I really am astounded at this statistic. On the other hand, Silicon Valley, which is a source of many billionaires, they're more than half from South Asia and are immigrants. So that may be the source of the skewing of income versus non-immigrants. But I've worked with immigrants, and my friends are immigrants. And I think to move to another country with different customs and a different language requires a certain optimism and willingness to change that are advantageous once you get here. And as a whole, immigrants are a benefit. On the other hand, the talk about filled versus unfilled jobs, many employers would love to fill jobs, but at salaries much less than the going rate. You could get someone to do the crappiest job if you pay him $1 million a year. So I don't want to keep throwing shotguns.
Okay, thank you so much. Kelly?
Yeah, hi. To me, the statistics, Garrett provided us, the immigrants are paying more tax. It's not really a surprise. The immigrants, they are hungry. So the people, when they are hungry, they have a work ethic. So they really, work hard. And the parents, they want to give their children the best education. So, everything we're going to lead to a really, high paying job. So first 2 years of the immigration, they might struggle, but they know how to, work way up. So everything is their passion, their enthusiasm, their positive, thinking, and again, discipline and, work ethic, all those things make, we see so many immigrants really successful in the United States. So my second thought is we all recognize how valuable the immigrants provide in this society. So USA, we cannot survive without immigrants. So recognizing this, critical value, why can we give them a little better opportunity and better, circumstances to dealing with and settling down these countries? So we've been hearing, horrible stories, as Gary mentioned, they separated the parents. Why we treat the immigrants like that? Eventually, they're gonna become, very resourceful in our society. So, ultimately, if they treated like that and, they become undocumented immigrants, people will gonna take advantage of them. And eventually, as an individual level, they're gonna live like a very degraded human being. So it's not really good for, anything. As a human being, we have the right to pursuit of happiness. So they are trying to come into this country pursuing the happiness. So as a, orchestrated effort, the government and individual level, we have to really try to help them in every way we can do. That's it.
So Kelly, you bring up a really interesting point, and you made me wonder why, because like all of the people that I know that are immigrants or children of immigrant families are very smart, hardworking people that are exactly what you said, hungry, and like have parents who focused really strongly on their education if their parents were immigrants, and they're all very successful. And so it made me think, well, why did I have this perception before I did the research? And I think it's really just that I've heard so many times immigrants aren't paying their fair share. And I've heard it said so many times that I just sort of believed it. And I usually don't fall prey to that. Like I usually fact check stuff, but this is one of those things that I've heard my entire life. And it's why I think it's so important to combat confirmation bias, because the things that we take for assumptions but never fact checked ourselves are the ones that are gonna create big surprises for us in life. And this one was for me, and I think you're right. And I really like what Abe said earlier. I only got to hear the first part because I had to step out, but which is that the American government doesn't really invest in education. We do invest in up to college, but then we tell everyone to pay your own way in college. And a lot of people don't pursue higher education because it's so expensive. And, they're already in so much debt from their undergrad. So they can't handle any more bills because they're barely making ends meet as it is with their college loans, which, by the way, college loans are one of the only types of debt that don't get forgiven when you declare bankruptcy, which is a whole nother issue for another night. But it doesn't make sense to me that there should be an exception for that, when every other type of debt you can declare bankruptcy for, although I can imagine that it could be taken advantage of. So I see why they did it. But that said, I want to let Sahar go. And thank you for your comments, Kelly. And sorry I missed the rest of what you said, Abe, because I really liked the first part.
So I'm mainly going to get on about the tax issue at this point. Because to me, it's always been very clear that immigrants pay more in taxes. Me personally, my family was lucky enough to get a very good immigration lawyer. And when we went through the system, like I was able to get a social security card, even though I'm still technically undocumented and my work authorization is technically expired. I still have a social security card that works. And if I find somebody that actually is willing to let me work without work authorization, I still pay taxes on all the money I make. I always have the whole time I've worked in this country. But even if that wasn't the case, just by the fact of existing here, people are undocumented or working under the table. They're also not benefiting, but they're also adding to the tax base just by the fact of living here, just in the way of sales tax. We pay taxes on a lot of things in this country, and it doesn't all come through income tax. But also, as somebody who's grown up here and always paid taxes, just because I was lucky enough to get a social security card, it's something that I have never been able to benefit from, just strictly because of the fact that I'm not a green card holder or a citizen completely. So, I can't apply for unemployment. I can't apply for food stamps. I can't apply for education assistance. And thankfully, I've never needed to. But it's something to think about. There are a lot of people who pay taxes both on an income tax level or a sales tax level or property tax that don't get to reap the benefits of those systems that they're paying into.
Yeah, thank you for making the point. I read that in my research and I should have added it to a slide. The point that not only do a lot of illegal immigrants pay taxes, but that they're always paying taxes through sales tax and property tax, et cetera. Whether it's property tax from owning property or it's through rent indirectly, you're still paying the same, you're paying for the property tax indirectly through rent because that owner's got to pay their property tax and they're making the money off the property, through the rent. So, so thanks for making those points, Sahar. Great points.
Yeah, and just as the last thing too, because I know a lot of people like to say that immigrants are using government resources and stuff. If you don't hold a green card or citizenship in this country, I mean, you simply cannot have access and do not have access to any government programs or government money. So just to dispel that myth, if anybody out there believes it.
Thank you for making that point, because that was what when I researched this, again, that's one of those things that I think I've heard it said so many times. And this is one thing that I will say, conservatives are really good at saying the same thing so many times that you just believe it's true because it's been said so many times. And I think it's really important when something sounds surprising to fact check it, because sometimes even if something's said a million times, it turns out not to be true. And I thought about it when I researched that number that based on demographics, that the expenses for U.S. citizens and people born in the U.S. and people that are immigrants were roughly the same. I was a little surprised by that because I had always heard that immigrants are putting this undue burden on society. But then I came to the same conclusion that you just stated, Sahar, which is, but they can't get any government entitlements, right? The most they could get is they show up at a hospital, about to die, and they get treated, which is pretty much what you have to be to get treated at a hospital without having medical coverage. You have to be about to die. And short of being about to die, you don't get treated at a hospital, you get sent home. And so there's no real opportunity to create an undue tax burden for immigrants because they're not entitled to any government assistance. So thanks for making that point. Fred, go ahead.
Having worked in technology for a long time, technology companies, it's not at all surprising that immigrants pay more in taxes, that we go to great lengths in technology to attract top talent from other countries, particularly in South Asia. And that typically is because, at least in my experience, the experience of others, that the immigrants that we attract are more qualified and more motivated than the people we can get locally. Now, however, when you say that we can't attract people that we can't fill jobs either because resident U.S. citizens aren't willing to work in those jobs or are not qualified to work in the jobs, or effectively saying is that U.S. companies would prefer to pay less for comparable or higher skilled workers from foreign countries rather than paying more in salary and paying more in training to hire resident U.S. citizens. Having said that, I would think that I wonder if you could point me to a source which does a better analysis of the data, because I expect that distribution of income is highly bimodal for immigrants. In other words, there's a lot of immigrants at the top, a lot of immigrants at the bottom, and that the social friction that often occurs in the U.S. is because, as much as anything, because of the velocity, first, the velocity of immigration, if there's a steep rise. Secondly, the geographic concentration, it's concentrated in a particular area. And third, because of the economic concentration, if it's concentrated in certain industries. Because we see, for example, that 20 years ago, like I'm from Oregon, 20 years ago, it was common in towns in Oregon for the schools to shut down for a week so the kids could go pick strawberries. That was just accepted, that all the kids pick strawberries. And then 20 years ago, immigrants eventually took those jobs. You can never find kids out in the fields picking strawberries now. 10 years ago, construction was primarily pretty well paid and was primarily occupied by U.S. residents. Now it's hard to find construction companies that aren't primarily driven and the jobs are filled by immigrants. So it sweeps through industries at in a concentration that causes social friction, because certain individuals in certain places find their jobs going to immigrants, and that's it's true that overall they might pay higher taxes, but I think there's a stark dichotomy, particularly between legal and illegal immigrants. The friction is even higher, compounded, because they realize that there's a legal process, and that that legal process is arduous. Again, working in technology, HR organizations in technology go through a whole lot of work to retain their legal resident immigrants working in their jobs. They always filling out paperwork and giving them documentation and making sure that everything goes right. And they will work for 6-7 years before they obtain permanent U.S. citizenship. And some people will get irked. Matter of fact, I know immigrants who are irked by people who are illegal immigrants, because they're going through a fairly arduous process, obeying all the laws, all the rules, and it takes them 6 to 7 years, whereas somebody else can work under the table. And so the causes of social friction are probably more related to what I said, that it's a concentration of in certain job strata and in certain geographical locations, and the sheer velocity of illegal immigration, as opposed to the very controlled, and I would argue,
Fred, those are some great points, but maybe you can raise your hand again.
I'll shut up now. I'll let somebody else.
I do want to hear from you, Fred. Just raise your hand again with your remaining comments. But I want to try to respond. I had got interrupted from a daughter wanting a bottle of milk. And so I heard part of what you were saying about US companies wanting to pay immigrants less money for the same job. I want to give a political response to that and then a practical reality response. The political response is, in order for a company to sponsor someone for a green card, we theoretically have to claim that we cannot find any US job seeker to fill that job with the same skill set. Now that's fiction, right? Because there's always a US job seeker if you wait long enough to find that person. But, theoretically, companies have to claim that they can't find any US citizen to fill that job in order to fill a green card role. The other thing is that theoretically, someone in a green card position has to be paid market rate. So theoretically, they should be being paid the active rate. Now, the actual realities, those are the political answers that the government would tell you. The reality is the people that I know that were green card holders were vastly underpaid compared to US peers in their field. And they were also beholden to stay with the same employer because it's really hard to get another employer to sponsor your green card. And they were also really hardworking, because if they lose their jobs, they lose their ability to stay in the country, or they have to find another job within literally like weeks or something ridiculous like that. And so I guess that would be one thing. I think your point about it depending on the type of job is a great point, Fred. Is like construction work is a great one. Like all of the people who've done construction on our house and condo have been immigrants, and so like the chances and so like I hear what you're saying there, and I think that the demographics could shift. I don't know if I missed any of the points that you were making, or if you wanted to respond to that.
That's good.
Garrett,
Thank you. Garrett.
I have
Let's move
to
on.
make a very quick comment on your slip of your tongue, Garrett. I just have
Yes.
to, because it was so cute when you said you got your daughter a bottle of milk.
I didn't get it. I got requested to get her a bottle, and I said I can't do it right now. Ask mommy.
But a bottle, not a cup. I mean, because she's 6 years old.
I know, like.
But it's very endearing because you
They
think
still
that
use
she's.
bottles. They still
Oh,
use
she does.
bottles. Like,
Oh,
what can I say? She does still use the bottle sometimes. Don't ask me. We spoil them sometimes. So, yeah,
sorry for teasing you.
that's okay. You're teasing my daughter as much as me. So, but she's very cute, and like we took them off of bottles for a long time, and then she got sick and she didn't want to drink milk out of the sippy cup and put her on a bottle, and she drank milk, and then we got kind of back into it. So anyway, Bill, go ahead.
On the topic of like Fred was commenting on industries such as construction industry and a lot of other industries, as you said, Garrett, where jobs, good paying jobs that used to be done by citizens are now being done by immigrants at a reduced wage. That is actually, to hate immigrants for that is misguided, because that's actually an argument that says, why are we able to pay people less for those jobs? And that's actually an argument for better unionization, higher minimum wage, and things like that, so that there isn't a bunch of jobs that nobody will do, except the people who are most desperate. Like, that's a terrible way to run an economy. I mean, it's a capitalist mentality, but it's a terrible way to run an economy where you're basically trying to lowball people all the time. So I would say the people that are saying this immigrant took my job, because they reduced the wage to a point where I couldn't pay for it, or I couldn't work there. What they should be doing is saying, why the heck is our minimum wage so low? Or why isn't that job unionized? So that it keeps the wages, so that anybody would be happy to do that job. I know that's a topic for a different discussion, perhaps, but
it is.
But
you're going to get me to veer a little bit off. You said that's a capitalist mentality. I would argue that's the current predominating version of capitalism. But we had another event last year on the ideal economic system, where I presented my perspective on what I call fair capitalism, which is a different incarnation of capitalism, which what I argue is more capitalist than the current incarnation of capitalism. So I call myself an extreme capitalist, but an extremely compassionate capitalist. And compassionate capitalism is the other name that I've given fair capitalism. And capitalism doesn't have to be the way that we see it today. It can be a much more fair, egalitarian thing. It's just not today. We can talk about that later if people are interested, but I want to keep going on this topic, and maybe we can chat about that in the online community. So that said, I want to let Abe go next.
Yeah, this anti-immigrant rhetoric, which is today, I think it's mainly geared towards people who are coming from the south of the border, and they are the boogeyman. I mean, these are type of jobs I don't think an average American would take. Picking up pumpkins from the field, or doing your lawn and stuff like that. I think most people are actually, the type of jobs they want are the jobs which require a big skill set, which these immigrants do. Those are the type of jobs they want. Because an immigrant today, in a few years' time, he's buying a house, he's doing all this stuff. I mean, there is a little bit of resentment actually towards them, rather than these people who are coming from the south of the border. And what they should be doing is allowing them to come as guest workers. This way, even you can get taxes, and at least you can figure out who is doing what. I mean, there is a count of all these people coming. That's all I have to say.
So I didn't understand what you meant by the first point you made about the jobs are not the jobs that Americans want.
Yeah, things like picking up pumpkins from out the farm, mainly the farm workers.
Got
I
it.
mean, an average American doesn't want to do that sort of job. Or
Yeah,
working in a beef plant, or mowing somebody's lawn, or doing stuff like that. I mean, it's.
Right.
I think they are paid, under the table. In fact, most
Yeah.
of these jobs.
No, I think that's a good point. I do think some Americans do want those jobs, but I would argue that all Americans would be better off if we leveraged, the amount of information available to help us like achieve higher wage jobs. And so even the people who want those jobs, and I agree with you, Abe, I think it's a minority that do, but I think that more often is people want to be outraged that they don't have a job, and blame someone else for not having a job rather than, be accountable that, maybe I need to go out and look for a job and get a valuable skill set to be marketable. So I think there's a couple of things going on there. But I think some Americans probably do, like a lot of Americans like their manufacturing jobs, right? And that's one that I think American manufacturing is like a shadow of its former self, right? Most manufacturing is offshore now. So a lot of, what were once, middle-class jobs are no longer, here. But as those jobs got offshored, new higher wage jobs came to take their place. But what didn't happen is there was no good way to transition people from the old jobs that they used to be doing that they lost to the new higher wage jobs. And now there's this, $4 million or 4 million employee to 10 million employee, gap of unfilled jobs because no one knows how to do those jobs, or not enough people know how to do those jobs. And so, that's where I think education and investing in the education of Americans becomes key. So that's it. Go ahead.
Yeah, that said, in places like Germany, if they have to lay off people, they do have to retrain these people who are being laid off in some other skill set.
Yeah.
And, it's a very progressive way of looking at things. Rather than us, we just leave them in the lurch and expect them to fend for themselves.
Yes, which, not to bring it back to the Taliban, but that's exactly what we did to the Taliban, is we hired the Taliban to give Russia their own Vietnam and Afghanistan. And then we decided not to figure out some path to help the Taliban have another job, where they, other than being paid by the US government to kill Russians, which is what they were paid to do. And now we do the same thing with US citizens, is we have US citizens that are unemployed and we don't help give them the job training, which, by the way, I don't want the government to be the ones running the job training programs. I want them to fund the job training programs and let industry do the job training, which I mentioned at our last event. One thing that Trump did that was good, I will say, a reasonable number of negative things about Mr. Trump, but one thing that he did that was good was he collaborated with industry to try to create job training for US citizens. I tried to look up how effective it was, and I wasn't able to find any data on that because coronavirus came, and that, there just wasn't any good data, was the reason that I found was that. But yeah, great points, Abe, and thanks for making them. That said, Katie, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm echoing what a couple of other people have said about I really appreciated the comment about the boogeyman thing. I think a lot of them, I remember I was sweeping in front of my house and someone said to me, "No one holds a broom anymore." And I chuckled and he got angry at me, which at first because he probably wasn't expecting me to laugh because it's true. A lot of people are no longer doing it. They're hiring somebody else to hold a broom. But I think the law, I liked also what you said, Garrett, about like they're not taking up health services for now, but I think that might change, because at some point I think they'll have more, I think they're probably going to be inclined to vote Democratic, and maybe that will change, and those services they'll start to maybe want to have those services. And what else was I going to say? I think that's it.
I didn't understand the point about that who will vote Democrat and then they'll have what services?
I think that people are often assuming that all of this Hispanic, like poor Hispanic immigrants will become a Democratic bloc, and that will change what they're demanding from the, or not demanding, what they're demanding, but what they want from the. Because I think that they're not, I mean, to not have any services and, you know, like just to have like, well, access to emergency healthcare, I think that might change in the future.
Yeah. And you know, I have a good friend that's a Hispanic Trump supporter. So there's definitely Hispanic Trump supporters and conservatives out there. So, but I think that as a large population, the majority are probably voting Democrat. So, but you know, you have to judge every individual as, you know, an individual and get to know each person as a person, because he's a really nice guy. And, you know, I have a number of Trump supporters that are really nice people. And I've also met Trump supporters and Hillary supporters that were not really nice people. And so what matters is that we all try hard to be really nice people, because at the end of the day, don't we want to be surrounded by really nice people? And if so, shouldn't we be one ourselves? So that said, thanks for your comments, Katie. And Sahar, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about foreign policy, just as far as how that deals with immigration, partly with my own case and with a lot of people coming up from South and Central America. And just to touch on what everybody said, a lot of Hispanics really do come from socially conservative households. A lot of them are Catholic, and there is a very high number of very conservative Hispanics, which, just coming from my own opinion with DACA, is almost kind of why I was wondering if that was a reason why the Democrats were refusing to move forward on it and provide a pathway to citizenship, if there was any concern about onboarding a new block of conservative Hispanic voters. But that's just coming from my own personal opinion. There's not really any facts to back that up. But moving on to the foreign policy thing, it's important to keep in mind that a lot of people that are moving from, you know, where they were born are coming to America because, you know, the countries of origin are no longer really livable, or if they are livable, there's not a lot of economic opportunity. And it's important to remember that American foreign policy has had a huge impact on countries in Central and South America, as far as the power structures and the leaders there. And my personal opinion, and I think from, you know, the little bit I know about history, we've always favored more ruthless dictator types to come in power into those countries for the benefit of American corporations and American businesses, which has multiple times turned out to be to the detriment of the people living in those areas, to the point where we see where it is today, where there's a lot of failed states, and people just simply don't have an opportunity to live down there. Not that they don't want to live down there, but if they want to make a better life for themselves, you know, they need to go where the opportunity is. And, you know, America, luckily, is still that place where there's opportunity. And how that ties into my story as a Palestinian, living back home in Palestine, there's not a lot of opportunity, partly, well, not partly, but entirely because of the Israeli occupation, which is very heavily influenced by American foreign policy. It's something that we've backed, you know, 100%. It's something that has made Palestine as a whole unlivable. There's not a lot of economic opportunity there. There's not a lot of upward mobility available there. So for that reason, you know, my family and a lot of other families have decided to immigrate, whether it's to America or other Western countries. But I mean, if I had the choice, I would want to be back home in Palestine. I would want to work there and have a good job there and, you know, support the community there. But unfortunately, it's just it's gotten to a point where it's not possible at the moment, directly due to the occupation and the foreign policy decisions of the United States. So, sorry, one more other point that just kind of lost me. What was I going to say? So moving here, my family, for example, we couldn't apply for asylum right away because we basically our case for asylum after our sponsorship fell through was the fact that it's dangerous for us to go back due to the Israeli government. But the strong ties between the Israeli government and the American government basically made it so that we didn't have a case for asylum, saying that we were escaping the Israeli occupation and the lack of living conditions back home. I don't know if that has any sort of impact with South Americans and Central Americans moving up here, but I remember that made our asylum case very complicated because we were running away from somebody that was, viewed as a friend of the United States, not necessarily, like a dictatorship or a quote unquote bad country that we would usually think of being here in America.
So a bunch of things to respond to with that, and I'm going to miss one, but I'm going to hit two. One is that I think your point about American foreign policy creating a lot of destabilization in countries, especially in South America and the Middle East, is really on point. For people who aren't familiar, the Middle East was actually, the Middle Eastern countries all agreed to join World War II in order to help the Allies under one condition, which is that at the end of World War II, that they would be allowed to unify in one Arab state. And then after World War II ended, I forget which two countries, I think the UK and France, if I remember right, but maybe I'm remembering wrong, but two countries basically divided up the Middle East and, created a lot of destabilization, intentionally putting in place puppet governments. And the US, whenever stably elected democratic governments like in Iran, there was a stably elected democratic government in, I think it was the 50s, and the US government, the CIA, created a coup and put the Shah in power, and that's why we have the current conservative regime in Iran. And so that story has gotten much worse in South America, where we've put in place terrorist governments. And if you aren't familiar with any of this history, read a couple of history books by Noam Chomsky, and just don't read them at night because they're very dark tellings of the US's misdeeds. And so great point that a lot of the people seeking to come to America to live a better life are coming here because we created a terrible life in their own home countries for themselves, and that is kind of our own, doing. And the least we can do is give them a better place to run away from than the place that we created, the bad place that we made their home country. The second thing about the poverty of Palestine, just a question. Were you saying that the settlements alone are the reason for the poverty in Palestine or the difficulties in Palestine, or were you meaning something broader than that?
It's broader in the terms of the occupation itself. The settlements, in a way, as far as the separation wall, the settlements have been built on the Palestinian side of the separation wall just as much as they have on the Israeli side. And the way they've been structured is they've basically really taken all of the best land, whether it's agricultural land or land that has access to the underground aquifers that are available in the region. So the stuff that we have been able to retain is, while it's still important to us, it's ancestral land. It's the less workable land, whether it's workable in an agricultural sense or in the sense of being able to support a society. But also in terms of that's how the settlements kind of affect things. But as far as the occupation on a greater note is that technology, for example, is very heavily controlled. There's not a lot of access to materials. The electrical supply, for example, we don't have access to very high electrical generation capacities, which limits any sort of industrial base from being set up. So just all of those different factors coming in as far as not having control of our own borders or what comes in and out of the territories has basically just made it impossible to thrive in any sort of way.
Yeah, that's all I was gonna say, is that I think trade blockades are a big part of the poverty and the socioeconomic difficulty that Palestine is facing. And I think the settlements are a part of it. I wasn't aware of some of the things you said, but we should probably have another event on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and that'll be for another night. But thanks for your comments, Sahar. And Ellis, did you want to mention something? I have a feeling I know what you're going to say.
Sure. It's almost well, it's around 8:30, so if anyone hasn't spoken yet, now's a good time to raise your hand. And I was just going to let you all know, upcoming next week is how to create a healthy social circle. And then after that, how to create an ethical world. So we hope that you all RSVP to those events as well.
Yeah. Excuse me, Garrett.
Yeah.
I saw your message, right? But I don't know where my hand is. I don't have a hand to raise.
Oh, so Susan, on the bottom of the screen where it says reactions, you'll want to click the little reactions button, and then it'll have like raise hand. Do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, you've been waiting a long time though. Go ahead, Susan. I'm sure you wanted to talk a long time ago. If you guys don't mind, Emma. Well, Emma hasn't spoken yet, so let me let Emma go, and then you can go, Susan.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
So go ahead, Emma.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, I don't think that there would be a state of Israel if Europe hadn't basically murdered the entire Israeli population of Europe. And I mean, I understand that I'm also against the occupation, but I just want to say it's more complicated than just that the United States supports Israel. I mean, basically the entire Jewish population of Europe was mass murdered, and Israel was the outcome of that. And if we can create a world where we don't go on mass murdering Jews, then I think the Israelis will let down their guard a little bit. And just trying to bring a little bit of historical context into the conversation about why the United States and Israel are allies. But, at the same time, the Israeli blockade of Palestine is incredibly inhumane. It's resulted in the death of tens of thousands of Palestinians. It's in violation of every United Nations rule about occupying powers. And Palestine doesn't have a free democracy. It doesn't have, I mean, the Israelis even control the water and the electricity. And it's amazing that the Palestinians thrive and resist under such incredibly brutal conditions. So I just don't think it's one of those like one side or the other kind of conversations though, because at the same time,
I'm glad
yeah. Anyways, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, Emma. I thought you were done. No, it's a great point. And Katie also mentioned that the US closed our borders to Jews at the time, and Time magazine made Hitler the man of the year. So wrong things were done in all around the world around that time, and the US only got into World War II because of Pearl Harbor. Like, there was no appetite to go into World War II, and chances are good that Hitler would have won World War II and eventually come and taken over the US too, and done his best to exterminate Jews globally had that not been prevented. But that's a whole nother story for another day. And I think you honed in on it, that while it does make sense for the US and Israel to be allies, I like to say that the first intention of the Free Thinker Institute is to be the best version of yourself, to seek truth, and to be fair. And when you're allies with someone, you have to give them the honest truth. That's about being fair and giving them the truth. And the truth is, we should be telling Israel, we're your friends, we're your allies, but as your friends, the blockade is inhumane, as you said, Emma, and you shouldn't be doing it. You should be letting Palestine thrive as a society and teaching them that, Israel can actually be a friend of theirs rather than be an enemy. But I'm going to try to say that love and compassion are the answer to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And that requires cooperation from both Israel and Palestine. And it requires people to let go of, generations upon generations, millennia, to be honest, of animosity, and to move on from that and to say there is a better path forward. And so we definitely, Ellis, take down like next free night, add it to the list of our event topics, to talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict, because that's an important one, and we should spend a night on it.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Sahar.
Oh, if I may just make a quick, I totally agree in the effects of World War II and the state of Israel becoming a state. But the beginning and the birth of like the real Zionism movement is also a very important fact that's little known about, starting in the late 1800s. But obviously that's for a different discussion than today. But it really started much farther before World War II. But it was a huge factor in the Israel actually becoming a state and getting statehood.
Yeah, and my understanding was actually like Zionism was a minority opinion, before World War II. But let's save that for the night that we cover that topic. So I want to let Susan go.
Yes. Yes, yeah, thank you. The Korean War and the Vietnamese War, which war was happening first? Korean War first, and then the Vietnamese War. Because when the American troop left the Vietnam, right, like they were the North was agreed to a treaty that they would leave the Southern Vietnam alone. But then when the American troop left, they came down and they dominated the South. And my father was a businessman, and you cannot you don't have any privilege or right, so the people start escaping by boat to get out of the country, right? And my sister went out first, and then she went to a refugee camp, and she was picked up by Australian government, and she became an Australian government. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, yeah. I thought I did not turn the thing, but anyway. So and then a couple of years after that, right? My mom, the Chinese people in Vietnam, they could not do business anymore, so they make a deal with the Vietnamese government at the time, the communist, that I will pay you gold, and then you will let my people go. I will charter a boat, and I will get out, right? So that's what happened. So my mom have some. My father has some Chinese friends, so that's how I got out by Chinese birth certificate. And when we got to the refugee camp, the United Nations came over and reunite all of the people. If you have relatives around the world, they put together. That's how I ended up in Australia. And I was there. I work. I go. They teach you English. They put you in a hostel, and then they find work for you. So we work. We move out, and I have a job. And then you save money, and in everywhere else, they want to go see America. Outside of here, they want to go in here. So I save money, and on work holidays, I work at a manufacturer, a blind factory, and I make $10 an hour. I came over here. I met the kid father, right? I used to go to school with him in Vietnam. He made $3.50. And when I met him like that, right? My custom is he's supposed to come back. I supposed to go back to my country, and he came over and asked, my mom to marry me. But he would never be making it. $3.50, and what are we now as minimum wage? $7.50. America in Australia is $22. Minimum wage. So the standard of living is so different, so I don't know, when I came here as an immigrant. I married, and I documented. You need a lawyer, to submit paper for you like that. But now, right, just recently, a friend of mine, he marries an American a woman, right? And it took him years, and I don't know what the holdup is, you know, like a lot of money. And then he cannot get his status. He doesn't have his citizenship. I'm here for 5 years and I became a citizen. You here for permanent resident for 5 years, and then you became a citizen. That was then. That was like 30 some years, 40 years ago. So what changed, you know? It's just so difficult for people to come here legally anymore. I mean, you know, like and then without I think without legal status, I don't think we will have like opportunity like when I came back there. I can go to training school. There was training school back there, you know, like you said, Mr. Trump have a training school. Yeah, I got training for 1 year, and when I went out and I worked, I work all the way like 30 some years. I keep on working, you know, because their opportunity there. But it's getting narrower and narrower. My kid now is like stressing more than anything. Like they have a lot of debt. You know, I don't have any debt, but a high school degree back there.
Susie,
good,
those are
right?
all good points.
Yeah, thank
Definitely you can raise your hand again to add
yeah,
more.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you for yeah, thank you for keeping me in line.
That's okay. I don't mean it that way. Garrett, you had something to say to that?
No, I don't have a lot of comments on Susan's points. So thank you for sharing your story, Susan. Yeah, I appreciate your comments. So Fred, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'll just step in because nobody else has their hand raised. So you cut me off any time if anybody wants to talk as well. I appreciate your story, Susan, and I think that's reflective of a lot of experiences. I think that, for example, the end of the debacle of the Vietnam War at the end, when we had this massive influx of Vietnamese refugees, is the classic refugee experience in the US, where the first refugees that came over from Vietnam largely worked in places like Louisiana on the shrimp boats, because they couldn't speak English and because that's the only work they could figure out that they could do. Their children tended to work in service industries, and their grandchildren but often ended up becoming doctors and lawyers. That's the classic US refugee experience. But that's becoming more and more difficult. And I think part of the problem is, as Susan pointed out, it's become so onerous to follow the path to citizenship now. Just the sheer bureaucratic and legalistic confusion and difficulty of following that path. That doesn't seem to be a particularly politically divisive issue. That there's no reason for legal immigrants and their sponsors in the form of companies to be so burdened with paperwork and legalities and the like. And that seems, you know, with the deep, unbridgeable chasms, political divides regarding immigration, would seem like that would be a point of commonality, that we should have a clearer and perhaps more open, first of all, guest worker program, and secondly, path to citizenship. Perhaps complementing that, a more robust enforcement of illegal immigration across the border, particularly as it would help to interdict crime and human trafficking, which is I think a somewhat newer feature of immigration, is particularly terrible, really, to the immigrants as much as anybody. So it seems like there's there's some way for commonality to address these, what seem to me somewhat unpolitical issues, but that's probably naive, and I'd like to hear what others say.
Sahar.
Yeah, I like those points, Fred. And especially being somebody who has, especially in recent years, not really had work authorization, despite the fact of having a social security card. I actually can't really put my finger on why we make it so hard for people to work, especially if they are willing to, for example, get a social security card, get a driver's license, work legally, pay taxes, support themselves, contribute to society. I really don't understand why we make it so difficult. Even if it's a guest worker program, if anybody has any insight or any ideas as to why it is such an issue, I'd be happy to hear it. But that is something that's always boggled my mind, especially with the rumors about immigrants being a burden on society and needing help. And it's like, well, if somebody's here and they want to work, why not give them the ability to work? And I think some people might argue that maybe that's a way of having this workforce that can be exploited for under the table work or being paid less than minimum wage or doing the jobs that we don't want to do. I don't know if that's anything to do with it, but that is something that's made me curious in the past.
What was the question? I missed that, Sahar.
Just as to why it's so difficult for people to just be able to work. If they're willing to do it legally, if they're willing to be in the system as far as Social Security or a work permit or a guest worker program, why we put so many obstacles in the way instead of just saying, hey, if you want to be in the system, you want to go through biometrics, we'll put you in the computers, you can work legally, you can pay taxes. I don't see how that doesn't benefit the country in any way.
So I made a pretty good case that it does benefit the country, but I'm also going to make the counter case about why, playing devil's advocate here for an opinion I think I legitimately believe in too, which is that if we don't have any disincentive, like basically, let's put it this way. If we say, look, if you can cross over the border, you basically get full rights to being a US employee and all the benefits that come along with it, then it gives a big incentive for people to like rush across the border as best they can in any way, shape, or form. And all they have to do is cross over into the border. And then suddenly, from their perspective, their life is made. That creates a huge incentive for a very large number of people to push really hard to get across the US border. And so I think there is a good reason to make it hard for people to come into the US through non-legal channels. At the same time, I think we should be letting more legal immigrants in, but I think that we should be doing it through, we should be encouraging people to come through legal channels. At the same time, I do think that for people who have been here for, a period of time, like there comes a point like yourself, you've been here for most of your, the vast majority of your life, like it doesn't make sense for you to not have legal work authorization in the US anymore, right? There's a point at which it becomes brutally obvious that you just should be like able to work here. And, where that gray area, somewhere in the middle, there's a gray area where there's a line that should be drawn. And I would argue that it shouldn't be if you get 1 inch into the US border, suddenly you have all the rights of a US citizen or something close to that. That doesn't make sense either, because that creates a huge incentive for people to like, rush the line. And maybe I'm not a football fan, so maybe I'm using the analogy wrong, but like, basically like to basically try to, rush across the border in mass in order to get all those benefits. And so I think there is a reason to like have a legal process and to, have a big incentive to go through the legal process, but like there's a balancing act. And I think that we have to be pragmatic about that and understand that, once someone has proven that they're going to make themselves a good US citizen, maybe having paid a couple of years of taxes when you're an undocumented illegal, for me, that kind of says like, all right, someone's here to like actually, pay their taxes, and even though they're illegal, they still filed taxes and decided to pay them. That would make me think like that person deserves to be able to have, work authorization. But, again, like I don't pretend to have the silver bullet answer on this one. But hopefully that gave a little bit of perspective as to why. I don't know, maybe you can answer if I did give a perspective as to why have some disincentive for people to just get full rights by joining into the border. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer actually. And I could have worded it better because I not necessarily just, okay, you get a green card or you get citizenship, but
Right.
yeah,
I
if you
didn't mean
are
to-
here,
Yeah.
yeah, basically if you are here, you graduated high school, you've gone to college, you have skills, then maybe at the very least there's just a work authorization program. So it doesn't quite open the door to the full benefits of a green card or citizenship as a whole, but opens the door to, you can benefit more from our society and to our society. But I did like your answer. It made sense.
Thanks. Abe, go ahead.
Yeah, based on what Sahar said, I mean, there's a big difference between, a practical solution and a political situation. I mean, most of these politicians, they're not interested in coming up with solutions. They're interested in being re-elected or elected. And that's why this whole drama or play in which they do all the
Someone
do
was
all, yeah, they do all these crazy things, just to get noticed. I mean, there are practical solutions for all these things, and nobody's interested in practical solution. Politicians are basically interested in how they are perceived in the media. And that's all what I have to say.
So maybe Abe, I think your first point was that they're more interested in whether or not they get reelected. I'll buy that more than just how they're perceived in the media, because Trump knew he wasn't being well perceived in the media, but he said, any press is good press. And it turned out to be true because he did get elected president. Now there were a bunch of other factors that played into that, including his political opponent being hacked by the people that he encouraged to hack her. But yeah, I think politicians are generally not super interested in practical solutions unless it serves their own interests. And I have another essay that I wrote on power, which is about how the very people attracted to power are the ones that want to control others rather than the ones who want to empower others. And I have a saying that goes along with this, which is that power should be used to empower rather than to overpower. Most politicians want to overpower people. They want to control them. And I would argue, if I psychoanalyze all politicians simultaneously in one fell swoop, it's that they lack control in their own lives, and where they lack control in their own lives, they decide to control other people, which is like trying to eat when you're thirsty. Like eating more food when you're thirsty isn't going to satisfy your quench. And so, unfortunately, that's the people that are generally the ones running for political power, and those are not the people we should be electing. And we need to get better as citizens, which is why the third intention of the Free Thinker Institute is to improve people's critical thinking skills. Because I would argue that if all Americans had good critical thinking skills, these would not be the people we're electing. We would have a very different set of elected representatives. And Congress would not have a lower political rating than polygamy, which, by the way, like polygamy, I'm not even against. Like, I think it's people's personal choice. So I'm one of those rare Americans that I think, like, up to people what they want to do. But Congress actually has a lower approval rating than polygamy, which is not a very palatable thing for most people. And so, I'm just about mutual consent. If everyone agrees to a relationship, that's fine with me. But I guess your point, I think, about politicians is well-founded, that politicians are not the most altruistic group. And I think we really need to do better in terms of vetting our elected politicians and voting for people who are better human beings, if I can be so bold as to say, and people who would rather empower the population rather than to be overpowering them. So that said, I want to let Susan go.
Term limits,
Oh, and then, sorry, say that out.
term limits.
Thank you. And I'm going to let Susan go, and then we're going to close out because it's 9 o'clock, and I've been up since about 4:30 this morning. So
Yeah, thank you so much for this, Garrett. And I wanted to ask you, right? We used to, they used to tell me that that you live here for 20 years, then you can apply for permanent citizen or citizenship. I don't know how the undocumented citizenship work out, but then they said that if you're here for 20 years, then you can apply for being a citizen here. Is it not true? No?
No, never heard of that.
There's a few things where
Yeah.
there's a certain clock that starts eventually. If you come in and you're like totally off the radar, you never have any encounters with immigration or the police or anything, there is a clock. It used to be 10 years. I don't know if it's 20 years now, but
I don't know.
after all that time, you could apply and potentially get your citizenship. But the caveat there is it's a lot of little things can stop that 10-year clock. And one of those things is actually going through the immigration system. It puts a stop on that clock. So it's a very difficult thing to have happen.
Yeah, 10 years sounds better than 20 years. I said, oh my goodness. It's like, oh, yeah, thank you for that. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
So yeah, I just tried to do a quick chat GPT and I didn't come up with a good answer. It's 5 years if you're if you have a green card that you can apply for naturalization. But most of the people I know got married by that time. So yeah, it looks like it depends on the circumstances. So that said, I do want to kind of close out. I want to thank everybody for coming and for the great conversation, the great questions, the great comments, and for listening with an open mind to other people's opinions. I want to encourage people to come back next week. We're going to talk about how to create a healthy social circle. There is a dearth of friendships internationally, not only in the US, but everywhere in the world. And just about everywhere in the world. I don't want to make a total blanket statement, but the vast majority of the world has a dearth of friendships. And so how to create a healthy social circle is pretty important. And I did a bunch of research on that this weekend as well. And it's been something that I've been gathering resources on for a while. So hope that people will be able to attend that. And then Ellis, do you remember the one after that?
Yes, I'll get that for you. The one after that is, see here, how to create an ethical world.
Oh, how to create a more ethical world. Okay. So the next one is about how to create a more ethical world. And so would love to talk about that with you all. And so hope you can come to some of those events, and hope that you all have a great rest of your week, and hope to see you guys on Tuesday. Would love to see you all in the online community and to stay in touch there. I will post a presentation there for anyone that wants the sources or to use it as reference or to share with others. I'm all about creating resources that will help us share truth with the FTI. So where we can dispel misinformation, that's a good thing. The studies show that fake news travels faster than real news. And I'd really like to create enough critical thinking skills in the community of the FTI that real news travels faster than fake news. And so let's keep doing our part to spread truth. I would argue we all have an inherent desire to be loyal to truth, which is why it's part of the first intention is commitment to seeking truth. And so thank you all for seeking truth with us. And I hope you all have a great rest of your night, and hope to see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
you.